Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. So I'm back with my book reading series named Read with RACHANA. And yes, it's the 8th day of my book reading series. I'm reading this awesome book, Becoming by Michelle Obama. And I am in the first chapter, that is Becoming B, in the 5th part of the first chapter. And I am so excited to continue this journey. I hope you are liking it, and if you like what I do, if you like my contents, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button, show some support, please like and share to your friends. So without further ado, let's get into it. In the manner of all high schoolers everywhere, my friends and I liked to loiter. We loitered boisterously and we loitered in public. On days when school got out early or when homework was light, we flocked from Whitney, Hawaii to downtown Chicago, landing in the 8th-story mall at Water Tower Place. Once there, we rode the escalators up and down, spent our money on gourmet popcorn from Garrett's, and commanded tables at McDonald's for more hours than was reasonable given how little food we ordered. We browsed the designer jeans and the purses at Marshall Fields, often surreptitiously tailed by security guards who didn't like the look of us. Sometimes we went to a movie. We were happy with our freedom, happy with one another, happy with the way the city seemed to glitter more on days when we weren't thinking about school. We were city kids learning how to range. I spent a lot of time with a classmate named Santita Jackson, who in the mornings boarded the Jeffrey bus a few stops after I did and who became one of my best friends in high school. Santita had a beautiful dark eyes, full cheeks, and the bearing of a wise woman, even at 16. At school, she was one of those kids who signed up for every AP class available and seemed to ace them all. She wore skirts when everyone else wore jeans and had a singing voice so clear and powerful that she would end up touring years later as a backup singer for Roberta Flack. She was also deep. It's what I loved most about Santita. Like me, she could be frivolous and goofy when we were with a larger group, but on our own we would get ponderous and intense, two girl philosophers together trying to sort out life's issues, big and small. We passed hours sprawled on the floor of Santita's room, on the second floor of her family's white Tudor house in Jackson Park Highlands, a more affluent section of South Shore, talking about things that irked us and where our lives were headed and what we did and didn't understand about the world. As a friend, she was a good listener and insightful, and I tried to be the same. Santita's father was famous. This was primarily impossible to get around fact of her life. She was the eldest child of the Reverend Jesse Jackson, the firebrand Baptist preacher and increasingly powerful political leader. Jackson had worked closely with Martin Luther King Jr. and risen to national prominence himself in the early 1970s as the founder of a political organization called Operation Push, which advocated for the rights of underdeserved African Americans. By the time we were in high school, he would become an outright celebrity, charismatic, well-connected, and constantly on the move. He toured the city, mesmerizing crowds with thundering calls for black people to shake off the undermining ghetto stereotypes and claim their long-denied political power. He preached a message of relentless, let's do this self-empowerment. Down with hope, up with hope. He would call to his audiences. He had school kids sign pledges to turn off the TV and devote 2 hours to their homeworks each night. He made parents promise to stay involved. He pushed back against the feeling of failure that permeated so many African American communities, urging people to quit with the self-pity and take charge of their own destiny. Nobody, but nobody, he would yell, is too poor to turn off the TV 2 hours a night. Hanging around Santita's house could be exciting. The place was roomy and a little chaotic, home to the family's 5 children and stocked with heavy Victorian furniture. and antique glassware that Santita's mom Jacqueline liked to collect. Mrs. Jackson, as I called her, had an expansive spirit and a big laugh. She wore colorful billowy clothes and served meals at a massive table in the dining room, hosting anyone who turned up, mostly people who belonged to what she called the movement. This included business leaders, politicians, and poets, plus a coterie of famous people from singers to athletes. When Reverend Jackson was at home, a different energy pulsed through the house. Routines were cast aside, dinner conversation lasted late in the night, advisors came and went, plans were always being made. Unlike at my apartment on Euclid, where life ran at orderly and predictable pace, my parents' concerns rarely extend beyond keeping our family happy and on track for success. The Jacksons seemed caught up in something larger, messier, and seemingly more impactful. The engagement was outward, their community was big, their mission important. Santita and her siblings were being raised to be politically active. They knew how and what to boycott. They marched for their father's causes. They went on his work trips, visiting places like Israel and Cuba, New York and Atlanta. They stood on stages in front of big crowds and were learning to observe the anxiety and controversy that came with having a father, maybe especially a black father, in public life. Reverend Jackson had bodyguards, a large silent man who traveled with him. At the time, it only half registered with me that there had been threats against his life. Santita adored her father and was proud of his work, but she was also trying to live her own life. She and I were all for strengthening the character of black youth across America, but we also needed rather desperately to get to Water Tower Place before the K-Swiss sneaker cell in debt. We often found ourselves looking for rides or to borrow a car because I lived in one-car family with two working parents. The odds were usually better at the Jackson's house, where Mrs. Jackson had both a good panel station wagon and a little sports car. Sometimes we'd hitch rides with the various staff members or visitors who buzzed in and out. What we sacrificed was control. This would become one of my early, unwitting lessons about life in politics. Schedules and plans never seemed to stick. Even standing on the far edge of the vortex, you still feel its spin. Santita and I were often stuck waiting out some delay that related to her father, a meeting that was running along, or a plane that was still circling the airport, or detouring through a series of last-minute stops. We would think that we were getting a ride home from school or going to mall, but instead we'd end up at political rally on the west side or stranded for hours at the Operation Push headquarters in Hyde Park. One day we found ourselves marching with a crowd of Jesse Jackson supporters in the Bot Bilkin Day Parade. The parade, named for a fictional character from a long ago newspaper column, is one of the South Side's grandest traditions, held every August, an extravaganza of marching bands and floats that run for almost 2 miles along Martin Luther King Jr. Drive through the heart of the African-American neighborhood that was once referred to as the Black Belt but was later rechristened Bronxville. The Bob Billiken Day Parade had been going on since 1929, and it was all about African-American parade. If you're in any sort of community leader or politician, it was and still is to this day more or less mandatory that you show up and walk the route. I didn't know at the time, but the vortex around Santita's father was starting to spin faster. Jesse Jackson was a few years from formally launching a run to be President of the United States, which means he was likely beginning to actively consider the idea. During the time we were in high school, money has to be raised, connections needed to be made. Running for president, I understand now, is an all-consuming, full-body effort for every individual involved, and a good campaigns tend to involve a stage setting, groundwork laying, preamble, which can add whole years to the effort. Setting his sights on the 1984 election, Jesse Jackson would become the second African American ever to run a serious national campaign for the presidency. after Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm's unsuccessful run in 1972. My guess is that at least some of this was on his mind at the time of the parade. What I knew was that I personally didn't love the feeling of being out there, thrust under a banking sun amid balloons and bullhorns, amid trombones and throngs of cheering people. The fanfare was fun and even intoxicating, but there was something about it and about politics in general that made me queasy. For one thing, I was someone who liked things to be neat and planned in advance, and from what I could tell, there seemed to be nothing specially neat about a life in politics. The parade had not been a part of my plan. As I remember it, Santita and I hadn't intended on joining at all. We'd be conscripted at the last minute, maybe by her mother or father, or by someone else in the movement who had caught us before we could follow through on whatever ideas we would have for ourselves that day. But I loved Santita dearly, and I was also a polite kid who, for the most part, went along with what adults told me to do. And so I'd done it. I'd plunged myself deep into the hot, spinning noisiness of Port Billiken Day parade. I arrived home at Euclid Avenue that evening to find my mother laughing. "I just saw you on TV," she said. She had been watching the news and spotted me marching alongside Santita, waving and smiling and going along. What made her laugh, I would guess, is that she also picked up on the queasiness, the fact that maybe I had been caught up in something I'd rather not do. When it came time to look at colleges, Santita and I both were interested in schools on the East Coast. She went to check out Harvard but was disheartened when an admission officer pointedly harassed her about her father's politics, when all she wanted was taken to be on her own terms. I spent a weekend visiting Craig at Princeton, where he seemed to have slipped into a productive rhythm of playing basketball, taking classes and hanging out at a campus center designed for minority students. The campus was large and pretty. An Ivy League school covered with ivy, and Craig's friends seemed nice enough. I didn't overthink it from there. Not once in my immediate family had much in the way of direct experience with college, so there was little anyway to debate or explore. As had always been the case, I figured that whatever Craig liked, I would like too, and that whatever he could accomplish, I could as well. And with that, Princeton became my top choice for school. Early in my senior year at Whitney Young, I went for an obligatory first appointment with the school college counselor to whom I had been assigned. I can't tell you much about the counselor because I deliberately and almost instantly blotted this experience out. I don't remember her age or race or how she happened to look at me that day when I turned up in her office doorway, full of pride at the fact that I was on track to graduate in the top 10% of my class as Whitney Young, and that I had been elected treasurer of the senior class, made the National Honor Society, and managed to vanquish pretty much every doubt I had arrived with as nervous ninth grader. I don't remember whether she inspected my transcript before or after I announced my interest in joining my brother at Princeton the following fall. It's possible, in fact, that during our short meeting, the college counselor said things to me that might have been positive and helpful, but I recall none of it. Because rightly or wrongly, I got stuck on one single sentence the woman uttered. "I'm not sure," she said, giving me a perfunctory, patronizing smile, "that you are a Princeton material." Her judgment was as swift as it was dismissive, probably based on a quick glance calculus involving my grades and test scores. It was some version, I imagine, of what this woman did all day long and with practiced efficiency, telling seniors where they did and didn't belong. I'm sure she figured she was only being realistic. I doubt she gave our conversation another thought. But as I have said, failure is a feeling long before it's an actual result. And for me, it felt like that's exactly what she was planting, a suggestion of failure long before I'd even tried to succeed. She was telling me to lower my sights, which was the absolute reverse of every last thing my parents had ever told me. Had I decided to believe her pronouncement would have toppled my confidence all over again, reviving the old trauma of not enough, not enough. But 3 years of keeping up with the ambitious kids at Whitney Young had taught me that I was something more. I wasn't going to let one person's opinion dislodge everything I thought I knew about myself. Instead, I switched my method without changing my goal. I would apply to Princeton and a scattershot selection of other schools, but without any more input from the college counselor. Instead, I sought help from someone who actually knew me. Mr. Smith, my assistant principal and neighbor, had seen my strengths as a student and furthermore trusted me with his own kids. He agreed to write me a recommendation letter. I've been lucky enough now in my life to meet all sorts of extraordinary and accomplished people, world leaders, inventors, musicians, astronauts, athletes, professors, entrepreneurs, artists and writers, pioneering doctors and researchers. Some, though not enough of them, are women. Some, though not enough, are black or of color. Some were born poor or have lived lives that too many of us would appear to have been unfairly heaped with adversity, and yet still they seem to operate as if they had every advantage in the world. What I have learned is this: all of them had their doubters. Some continue to have roaring stadium-sized collection of critics and naysayers who will shout, "I told you so," at every little misstep or mistake. The noise doesn't go away, but the most successful people I know have figured out how to live with it, to lean on the people who believe in them and to push onward with their goals. That day I left the college counselor's office at Whitney Young, I was fuming, my ego bruised. More than anything, my only thought in the moment was, "I'll show you." But then I settled down and got back to work. I never thought getting into college would be so easy, but I was learning to focus and have faith in my own story. I tried to tell the whole thing in my college essay rather than pretending that I was madly intellectual and thought I'd fit right in inside the eastern walls of Princeton. I wrote about my father's MS and my family's lack of experience with higher education. I owned the fact that I was reaching. Given my background, reaching was really all I could do. And ultimately, I suppose that I did show that college counselor, because 6 or 7 months later, a letter arrived in our mailbox on Euclid Avenue offering me admission to Princeton. My parents and I celebrated that night by having pizza delivered from Italian Fiesta. I called Craig and shouted the good news. The next day I knocked on Mr. Smith's door to tell him about my acceptance, thanking him for his help. I never did stop in on the college counselor to tell her she would have been wrong. That was Princeton material after all. Wow. It would have been done nothing for either of us, and in the end, I hadn't needed to show her anything. I was only showing myself. Okay, this was quite emotional for me. I am actually crying. You know, oftentimes in life, people tell us that you are not this, you are not that, and we let that, sink into us. But like, we are making ourselves, we are the one that decides what's good for us and what is bad for us. So we should not, think what other people say, and we should not rely on their decisions. Just we need to make our own decisions. This was quite emotional for me, because hearing about how she came, what type of background she came from, I think I appreciate that our parents actually, had such a nice culture given to them, and to fight around people. Actually, it's very, very inspiring. I'm so inspired with this at this point. Okay guys, I'm done with the 5th part of the first chapter, Becoming Me, and tomorrow I'll continue from the 6th part. Until now, I am loving this book, to be very, very honest. I was quite emotional by the end. I found it very, very inspiring. So I'd still say that if you are not sure whether you should read or not, like this book, please, I would request you should go through it once. If you are lost in your life, if you are having existential crisis, or if you are someone who wants to have some real life inspiration and motivation, please go through it once. And thank you so much if you have still till the end. I really appreciate the support that you are showing to me. Thank you so much, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care, stay safe, have a good day.